Okay, so we are all set. Is there any introduction that you all would like to give?
Debbie has already talked to them about the demographic dividend. And I guess some of this material was presented, or at least the concept was presented in Uganda during the last training session. So people are familiar.
Okay, wonderful. May I ask how many folks are in the room on your side?
We have 10 journalists.
Well, welcome to the journalists. My name is Liz Leahy-Matson. I'm a program director at PRB. I'm very happy to be speaking with you. It's quite snowy here. I hope you are having better weather in Brussels than we are. Thank you so much for joining. So the purpose of today's webinar is to introduce to you a new interactive web feature that presents country-specific data about the effect of population trends on broader development. We call this the 4 dividends. The name 4 dividends starts from the concept of course, the demographic dividend. I'm curious if any of the journalists in the room would like to volunteer a definition of the demographic dividend.
Would anyone like to volunteer a definition of the demographic dividend?
We did this earlier, so.
Oh, okay.
Who can repeat what we talked to Joyce?
Yeah, it's benefits that you get from changes in the population structure after making some investments in the population.
Did you hear that?
Benefits that you get from changes in the age structure after making various investments, I think is what I heard.
Yes.
That's a great definition. Thank you. Here at PRB, at least, we are seeing a lot of increased interest in the demographic dividend concept within Africa. There's a lot of buzz around it. In fact, the African Union, as you probably know, defined 2017 as the year of youth and the demographic dividend. I'm curious if in your countries, the journalists are also seeing increased interest in the demographic dividend.
Yeah.
Some people are nodding. Some people are saying not so much.
Okay, so it varies.
So our journalist from Uganda was actually sort of complaining about the lack of interest in it yesterday because she thinks it would be relevant if more people understood it.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, where we are seeing increased enthusiasm for population issues, we think it's a really good thing, especially because more people are realizing that increased use of family planning can enhance economic growth through changes in population age structure. We have even heard that in some settings, especially in West Africa, talking about the demographic dividend has helped overcome policymakers' long-standing resistance to supporting family planning. But there are 2 problems with the current demographic dividend dialogue among policymakers. The first problem is that the demographic dividend is a technical concept and very difficult to communicate accurately and simply. Therefore, policymakers don't understand it very well. We often see misconceptions, such as a lack of understanding about the substantial fertility decline that is required, or an assumption that once fertility change begins, economic benefits are guaranteed. Second, the demographic dividend has traditionally been defined in purely economic terms. Here is one traditional definition. The demographic dividend is the faster rate of economic growth that can happen due to an increase in the relative size of the working age population if the broader macroeconomic climate and national policies are favorable for job growth and investment. That's just a more detailed version of the definition that one of the journalists offered a few minutes ago. But age structure change can benefit many areas of national development beyond the economy. There are also discrete health, education, and even political benefits of having a more mature population age structure. We believe that if other sectors adopted the DD concept and integrated their research and advocacy into a DD framework, it could amplify awareness and interest among high-level policymakers. If people working in child health, education, and security understood the demographic dividend as a benefit to them and championed it too, the reinforcing messages coming from multiple sectors might more successfully capture and maintain policymakers' attention. So the research presented in front of you in this web feature expands the concept of the demographic dividend to project 4 potential sets of benefits: economic growth, but also child survival, education, and political stability. We show that a country's likelihood of making substantial gains in each of these 4 sectors is tied to its age structure. I'm not going to go very deeply into the methodology of this research, but I'm happy to answer questions about it if you're interested. Briefly, the work draws on data from over 100 countries dating back to the 1970s and uses a type of statistical analysis called logistic regression modeling. This research measures the statistical relationships between median age and the probability of a given country attaining a specific level of development in each of 4 sectors, based on the experience of other countries that have already passed through the demographic transition. Here is the most important finding from this research. Countries are statistically unlikely to attain high levels of child survival, educational attainment, per capita income, and political stability until their fertility rate has declined below 3 children per woman. So to further explain this, I'm going to show you a brief video that we have made as an introduction to this feature. So Alana, I'm going to hit play and just let me know if you have any trouble hearing or seeing the video, okay?
Okay.
The demographic dividend is the accelerated economic growth that may result from a change in the age structure of the population. A country can shift its population age structure by substantially improving child survival and lowering fertility rates, a process known as demographic transition. With fewer births each year, a country's young dependent population grows smaller relative to the working age population. With fewer people to support and smart investments in social and economic policies, the country has a window of opportunity for rapid economic growth. Experts estimate that the window of opportunity for a demographic dividend occurs when the median age of the population, in other words, the age at which half of the population is older and half is younger, is between 26 and 41 years. To help put this in context, the 2015 median age for Japan was 46, and for Nigeria, it was 18. The window of opportunity opens after a country's total fertility rate declines to 2.8 children per woman. Although much attention is paid to the economic benefits that can result from the demographic transition, countries can also achieve development benchmarks, or dividends, in many other sectors resulting from age structure change. These dividends include health, education, the economy, and political stability. Progress for any of these 4 dividends can be measured in different ways. Here, they are measured using the following indicators. Child survival. Is the mortality rate of children under age 5 less than or equal to 25 deaths per 1,000 live births? Educational attainment. Is the late secondary school enrollment rate at or above 60%? Income per capita. Has the country achieved upper middle income status? And political stability. Has civil conflict been absent for a period of at least 10 years? These dividends become attainable when a country achieves a more mature age structure. To do so, countries must invest in voluntary family planning and make improvements in child health, girls' education, and employment opportunities for youth. Scroll down to see how to measure a country's likelihood of achieving each of the 4 dividends as the age structure changes.
So, for high fertility countries, this research shows that the prospects of attaining high levels of development in the near term are dim. Across the more than 100 countries and 40 years of data, countries with very youthful populations have almost never attained high thresholds of development. For example, Nigeria, which has a fertility rate of over 5 children per woman and a median age of 18, has only a 1% chance of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals target for child survival. The good news is that once fertility declines to less than 3 children per woman, rapid improvements in development measures are likely. The odds of attaining high levels of development accelerate quickly once the demographic window of opportunity opens. In other words, once median age reaches 26 years. At that point, countries are more likely than not to have late secondary school enrollment rates of at least 60%. And when median age reaches 31, they are at least 50% likely to have attained upper middle income status. Next, I'd like to show you how we can use this tool to explore the specific prospects for individual countries. So let's start with the health sector. Here we're analyzing countries' odds of achieving the SDGs target for child survival, and you can see that on the screen. That is a child mortality rate of less than 25 deaths per 1,000 births. Overall, we find that countries become at least 50% likely to achieve this target once their median age reaches 29. I'm going to take you right to the interactive part of the feature. So the orange line on this graph is a function that shows the probability or the percent likelihood of a country achieving the SDGs target for child survival. And that probability is represented here on the vertical axis based on its median age, which is here on the horizontal axis. So we're going to look at the probability for Ghana. I think you may have someone in the room from Ghana.
Mhm. Yes.
Great. So I've just selected Ghana from this menu, but you can see all countries are listed here. And each of these white dots here represents a population projection for Ghana at 5-year intervals between now and 2050. So if we look at the dot on the bottom, it shows data for 2015. Can you see how there's a little box with the data?
Mhm.
Can't read it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, since we have zoomed out, then the numbers are a little bit small, but I'll tell you what it says. UN data showed that in 2015, Ghana had a fertility rate of 4.2 children per woman and a median age of 20. And our research shows that with that particular type of age structure, Ghana had only a 4% probability of achieving the SDGs target for child survival. And again, these probabilities are based on over 40 years of data from over 100 countries that have already passed through the demographic transition. But what are Ghana's prospects in 2050? So if we move to the highest white dot on the graph, which shows data for 2050, we can see, or you may not be able to see, that the UN projects that Ghana's median age will have increased to 27 by 2050, and so it will have a 32% probability of achieving the SDGs target for child survival. Remember, our research shows that countries become at least 50% likely up here to achieve this benefit when their median age crosses 29. An important note is the assumption behind the future population projections. In order for Ghana's median age to rise to 27 in 2050 from its current level of 20, the fertility rate would need to decline to 2.8 children per woman. Does anyone have any questions about this the data.
Someone just asked if you could repeat what you just said.
The part about the assumption for,
Is that the part you wanted to hear again?
The
Yes.
empowerment.
Yes, empowering women, that part.
so I just wanted to emphasize that the future population projections, which are represented by all the white dots after 2015, have some important assumptions behind them. And in this case, for Ghana's median age to rise to 27 in 2050 from the current level of 20, its fertility rate would need to decline to 2.8 children per woman.
2.8, yes.
All right, so next we're going to look at the education dividend. So the specific benefit that we are measuring in the education sector is whether the late secondary school enrollment rate has passed 60%. In other words, are at least 3/5 of the children of the relevant age group enrolled in upper secondary school. And we find that this benefit becomes available to countries earlier in the demographic transition than the health dividend, that is, at a younger median age. So once a country's median age reaches 25, it has at least a 50% probability of reaching this target secondary enrollment rate. So I thought that for the education sector, we would look at data for Tanzania. Do we have anyone from Tanzania in the room?
We do.
Great. So, as you may know, Tanzania has a younger age structure right now than Ghana does. And if we look at the white dot on the bottom, which shows the data for 2015, oh, thanks, Heidi. We see that Tanzania's fertility rate was estimated at over 5 children per woman in 2015, and its median age was 17. So that means that half of the population was younger than 17. With such a youthful population, Tanzania only had a 4% probability of achieving the education dividend in 2015. Now again, if fertility declines and the age structure becomes more mature, Tanzania's odds of achieving the education dividend increase, but they still wouldn't reach that 50% probability by 2050 because the starting age structure is so youthful. You can see here in this box that by 2050, if Tanzania's fertility rate declines to 3.4 children per woman and its median age rises to 22, the probability of achieving the education dividend would be 27%. The 50% threshold for this particular dividend, up where my cursor is at a median age of 25. So let's take a quick look at a country that has a different trajectory, and that would be Rwanda. Is there anyone from Rwanda in the room?
Yes.
No.
No.
No?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, you can see how different the white dots look for Rwanda. As we all know, contraceptive use has increased dramatically in Rwanda and fertility is starting to decline. In 2015, down here, fertility was still relatively high and the population youthful, with a median age of 19. But because Rwanda's fertility is entering a rapid decline, its odds of achieving this dividend are rising quickly. And in about 2035, that's this dot, it will cross the 50% probability threshold. And by 2050, the highest dot, if fertility declines as the UN projects to 2.4 children per woman, Rwanda is nearly certain to achieve the education dividend. Its median age would be 29, and so it would have an 85% likelihood of having a late secondary enrollment rate above 60%. So some good news. Wanda. I think we'll move on to the economic dividend next.
Does anybody have questions about educational attainment specifically? No? Okay.
So, as you know, the demographic dividend has traditionally been defined in terms of economic growth. And we did not leave that particular benefit out of our research. We looked at the probability of a country reaching lower middle as well as upper middle income status as defined by the World Bank. The 50% probability of attaining lower middle income status actually occurs fairly early in the demographic transition at a median age of 25. However, upper middle income status usually comes much later at a median age of 31. For this dividend, I thought we would look at Kenya. Do we have Kenya represented in the room?
Yes.
Great. So you can see that we have two different lines on this graph. The blue line here represents the probability of attaining lower middle income status, and the gold line represents upper middle income status. So in 2015, with a fertility rate of 4.1 children per woman and a median age of 19, again, this is UN data, Kenya had only a 27% probability of being a lower middle income country. But maybe our colleague from Kenya who's in the room can tell us the good news, which is that Kenya has beaten the odds.
Yeah.
Its GNI per capita places it already in the lower middle income category. So we can say that Kenya achieved this dividend earlier than expected, given its median age. And I really want to emphasize that this is an important point, because what we're showing you on these graphs are statistical probabilities, and they account for the experience of many countries. But of course, there are specific factors unique to each country that might affect whether a dividend occurs earlier or later than projected. Demography is not destiny, but it is a very powerful predictive tool. Another point I'd like to emphasize about the economic dividend is the difference in the probability of attaining lower middle income status compared to upper middle income status. So even if Kenya's fertility continues to decline and is at about 2.6 children per woman by 2050, it will only have a 26% likelihood of being an upper middle income country. In other words, it's relatively easy to reach lower middle income status with a youthful population, but it's much harder to reach upper middle income status. Any questions about the economic dividend?
Yes. Hold on just a second.
Thank you very much for the information. I think it's spot on. I have a question regarding the how Kenya has been able to achieve to get into the lower middle income status earlier than planned.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a possibility that these dividends that Kenya is enjoying are not really from changes in the population age structure specifically, but the rebasing of the economy? Because as you well know, in Africa, there are many countries, Kenya included, where they've been able to discover oil and many other natural resources. So is there a possibility that it may be too soon to celebrate these you know, the dividends we are enjoying now. So it's not really about the changes in the population structure, but external factors such as the natural resources.
Yes, that is a very astute point. In fact, one of the methodological points about this research is that countries that have a high proportion of their income from oil or natural resource extraction and rents tend to achieve these dividends earlier in the demographic transition because of the boost to their economy from those natural resources. But as you've said, there are some legitimate questions about whether that economic boost from oil and natural resources actually benefits the entire population and brings everyone up, or whether it tends to maybe only benefit a few. So you're exactly right on that point.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not for the moment.
Okay, so we will move to the fourth dividend, the fourth of four, which is political stability. And we are defining this one as when a country has no outbreaks of civil conflict over a 10-year period. Now, the statistical relationships for this particular dividend are the weakest of the four. And that's because it's quite often that a country achieves political stability for a few years, but then loses it. Peace and conflict is one of the most complex and multifaceted, difficult areas of development to try to predict. That said, we do know that conflict is more prevalent in countries with youthful age structures. And our research shows that at a median age of 21, countries have reached that 50% likelihood of having no conflicts in a given decade. This 50% probability threshold occurs at a much younger median age than the other three dividends. However, countries are also much more likely to regress in this dividend than the others. That is, they might have several years of peace, but then conflict flares up. I thought that for this one, we would move back to West Africa and look at Benin. Is there anyone from Benin in the room?
Yes.
Great. And bienvenue. In 2015, with a fertility rate of over 5 children per woman and a median age of 18, Benin hadn't yet reached the 50% probability threshold, but it was close. And by 2035, if fertility falls to 4 children per woman and median age rises to 21 years, Benin will be 50% likely to pass 10 years with no civil conflict. Are there any questions about this political stability dividend?
Yes.
Are there countries that have 21 years on the continent and have still suffered instability already?
Were you able to hear that?
Not entirely. Could you repeat it, Alana?
Sure. So if you want to come, that's fine. So I'm going to have her come. This is Benedicta from Uganda.
So 2 things. Are there countries in Africa that have a median age of 21? And if yes, are they likely, what's the likelihood that they can have that median age and then go back and suffer instability? And then the other question is, are there countries that have, let's say, 15 as median age, 15, 16, or 17, whatever, and they have already achieved that stability without meeting the 21 median age?
Thank you, Benedicta. So I don't have the conflict data for every country in front of me. I'm happy to get back to you on that, but I can say that I do not believe there are any countries in Africa yet that have reached a median age of 31. That is a very advanced median age. We can check.
21. She said 21.
But, oh, I thought 21 was her first question.
Yeah, 21. Which is
Right.
what you presented as the median age to
Right.
achieve this state.
Threshold. So are there examples of countries that have reached that median age of 21 but yet still have conflict? There certainly are, because the 21 threshold means you only have a 50% likelihood of passing 10 years without conflict. That means that you also, of course, have a 50% likelihood that you will experience conflict in those 10 years. And this is civil conflict, meaning internal conflict within the single country, and it's looking at a pretty low threshold. So if a country experiences just 25 deaths from a conflict in a given year, then it counts as having experienced conflict that year. I think your other question is whether there are examples of countries with very, very young median ages, like 15 or 16, that have attained steady peace. Is that right?
Yes.
So I defer to those of you in the room as the experts, but I don't think so. So some of the youngest current median ages are in West Africa. Niger, I just pulled up on the screen, has a median age of 15. Certainly has experienced a lot of conflict and instability lately. Mali, median age of 16.
Uganda?
She's asking about Uganda.
Sure.
Zambia, Malawi, Zambia,
Uganda's median age is about 16.
Zambia. Yeah, so.
Do you want her to look it up? Is that Zambia? Can you look up Zambia?
Sure. Zambia is doing a little bit better, median age of 17. Are there other countries you'd like me to look at?
So I think your point, Dicta, is that Uganda has a young median age of 16, and yet you've not had civil conflict for 10 years.
Yeah, I'm checking.
Yeah.
Data having conflict.
Right. Would you qualify Uganda as having civil conflict in the last 10 years? Because I think most people probably wouldn't.
So I would need to look at the data from the source, which comes from a university in Sweden and a place called the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. But the important point about conflict is that it's so different than the other three dividends because it is not uncommon for a country to backslide. So there are many cases where countries have attained 10 years of peace or more, but then they lose it. So unfortunately, it's the least stable of the four dividends. You might, it's a great thing to achieve those 10 years, but your chances of maintaining it with a youthful age structure are pretty low.
Okay, but it does depend on other factors. Like if you have a strong man in charge of the country, they're more likely to maintain peace, like Museveni, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different factors that go into play in civil conflict, including, the neighborhood that you live in. So, Uganda is currently, I think, facing a lot of challenges from what's happening in South Sudan.
Yep.
And historically has also with its neighbors to the west. And so, it doesn't take much for a country to be classified as experiencing conflict. It's just that 25 deaths per year counts
Mhm.
as experiencing civil conflict.
Then Uganda will be in the one
Mhm.
conflict.
Right.
Included to consider
Wouldn't be.
conflict.
Right. Liz, if people want additional resources here, like if they want to trace some of the data back to its root source, like the Institute of Peace in Norway, for instance, what can they get in touch with you directly and ask for that?
Of course they can, and also
Okay.
point you down at the very bottom of the web feature. We have a little bit of more information about the methodology, and that includes the sources for each of the 4 dividends.
Okay.
But if anybody has specific questions, I'm also happy to look it up for individual countries.
Okay. So I'll pass along her contact details for anyone that wants to get more specific information behind the data.
Are you going to share the report?
Yes. Yeah. We'll share this link with you so you can go in and sort of adjust the tables based on what you want to know.
Do we have like some data for each and every country?
Yes.
Alana, would it be appropriate for me to sort of share some wrapping up comments? And then we
Yeah,
can
absolutely. And then if anyone has questions, maybe we can ask.
Definitely.
Okay. So go ahead.
So what are some of the key takeaways from this research? The first point that I want to emphasize is reinforcing some good news, which is that as countries progress through the demographic transition and their age structures mature, they have the potential for dramatic progress in not just one, but 4 different sectors. Once the median age reaches 25, a country is more likely than not to achieve lower middle income status and to have a high proportion of youth enrolled in late secondary school. With a median age of 29, a country becomes likely to achieve the SDG's target for child survival. And once median age reaches 31, it has a good chance of attaining upper middle income status. Political stability also becomes increasingly likely as age structures mature. The second key point is that no dividend is guaranteed. Statistically, these dividends, as we define them, are almost never reached by countries with very youthful populations, those that have median ages in the teens and low 20s. In the rare case when a country that is that youthful achieves one of these dividends, it is usually a country that has a very small population or one that has a lot of oil and mineral wealth, as we discussed a few minutes ago. So what should such a youthful country do? The first step is to promote progress through the demographic transition to lower fertility rates. And this is essential to achieving any of the 4 dividends. To do so, governments must improve child survival and reduce fertility by promoting the planning and spacing of births through voluntary family planning. Child survival has improved in many of the world's least developed countries, but declines in fertility, as you know, have often been slow. Millions of women have more children than they desire. Meeting the family planning needs of these women will improve their well-being and also support a demographic transition. But if current trends continue in many countries, not all, high fertility will delay all 4 of the demographic dividends. Another point is that even if its age structure is becoming favorable, like in Rwanda, countries must invest in other sectors too. Education, especially at the secondary level and above, promotes human capital and a shift into more advanced industries through a high-skilled, competitive workforce and greater economic participation by women. A government also needs to attract foreign investment, promote locally manufactured goods, and meet the employment needs of a growing labor force in order to provide a sound foundation for rapid economic growth. So that concludes my presentation of the 4 dividends. We hope that this research, which shows how health, education, economic, and political development are linked through age structure change, might generate increased interest in programs that support demographic change across all sectors. So in addition to answering some more questions, I'm also really interested to hear the journalists' feedback and reactions. to what you think about this feature and about the prospects for communicating it within your own countries. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if you do have a question, and I also think it would be really helpful to have feedback about this and how you can best use it in your countries and in journalism, you can either come up here or I can relay your comments, but it would probably be easier for you to come here.
I was just wondering if this information is available to various countries, especially those representing these issues outside. Are they available to the individual?
By available, so these are all online, but do you mean is there a concerted effort to deliver them to policymakers? Okay, so I don't know if you heard that, but we have a question about whether this research has, what's that?
What was the question? Whether the information is available
Yes.
for those who that label, right?
So, sure.
Are we aware of this?
Is there an effort to deliver this information to policymakers in respective countries?
I mean, this is brand new. You are among the first group of people who are seeing this outside of PRB. And so we are very curious to hear what you think in terms of communicate the prospects for communicating this research in countries to policymakers. You know, does it make sense? Is it too complex? Does it introduce new arguments and new evidence and new data points that would be helpful? You know, we'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. I will say that we are planning to communicate it at the International Conference for Family Planning in November in Kigali. And we're planning to train some advocates from high fertility countries on what the research says and sort of do some brainstorming with them about messages that they could use in their own countries to share this research with policymakers. But we're also really open to your suggestions for how it could be best disseminated.
Jamila, I'm going to pick on you because you brought this up. So do you want to come say what you think the best way to deliver this message to policymakers in your country would be?
I comment on that. I think African leaders know about the demographic dividends because I think they have a document on demographic dividends relating to all these sectors, and each country has its own plan of implementing it. So I think they already know about the benefits it has for all the African countries, but
so everybody is nodding at that, like that. Yeah. There seems to be consensus around the fact that this is already something that's understood by policymakers to some degree, and they've already made commitments. Whether or not they follow through on them is a separate story.
Yeah. So for me, what my feedback is on this is it reinforces what they already know, but I think it would be better if you push it a little further, because sometimes it's one thing planning and another implementing. So if they really have all these figures and projections as to if we can meet it or not, for instance, if Ghana is not able to meet the child survival rate at 2050, then that gives them something to be more focused on, particularly maybe in the health sector. So I think we can push it more by, like you said, the Kigali conference, if you'd have people from different countries who are involved in policy making, knowing about this and how it will help them in projecting the activities, that would really help. Okay.
Yeah, anybody, please.
Come close.
I'd like to ask why they chose child mortality as one of the measures of all the SDGs. I think that's like one that leaders don't really care about.
That's interesting. Really, child survival? That's interesting.
Yes. No, guys. I mean, if they are not politicking, most leaders won't mind. I think if he's standing on a pulpit and he talks about eliminating poverty, that's a much more easier, a much more interesting measure than child survival. Also, child survival, I think, is one of the of the areas where countries made progress under the MDGs. So I want to understand why you chose child survival instead of, say, affordable and clean energy, something that's also a buzzword among many leaders more than child survival, or reduction of poverty. Why did you choose child survival?
Were you able to hear all that?
I was, yes. And I think I might respond to both of the speakers. So I'll start with the second question. Why did we choose child survival? So we wanted to show how age structure change benefits 4 different sectors. And so the thinking was, if you are a policymaker who works in the economic sector, then you're going to be interested to know about how median age relates to your country's likelihood of achieving upper and lower middle income status. But if you're a policymaker who works in the health sector, we made the assumption that you might be interested in knowing about your country's probability of achieving the new SDGs target. So it's interesting to hear that child survival is not something that policymakers really want or are interested in talking about. It's actually, we thought we had done well by linking demographic change to a specific SDGs target. And as you can see, the median age with the 50% likelihood for that benefit is pretty high. You know, it's a median age of 29. And so most countries in Africa are not on track to achieve the SDGs target for child survival, given their useful age structures. So we actually thought that would be a pretty powerful point. And I'm interested, I really appreciate your feedback that it might not be. You mentioned energy. I think energy is probably a sector that would be very difficult to link to demography. Simply because it is so dependent on geographic and natural factors and not really dependent on people factors.
So she asked about maternal mortality, and that's interesting because you think policymakers would care about maternal mortality, but they don't care about child survival. Is that right? That's odd, but interesting.
Because, I mean, we have, at least in my country, for example,
Yeah.
The speaker who is a woman, the speaker of parliament who is a woman, so
Okay.
more about maternal
So it's
mortality.
something that women in politics would take up as a sort of personal issue.
Right. And you know, another point about this is that these are 4 specific dividends that we chose, but the relationship holds for other dividends as well. So as you know, there's a very strong correlation between maternal mortality rates and child survival rates, because those 2 things are very closely linked. And so if we had chosen to look at maternal mortality instead, the analysis would have been very similar.
Okay.
I wanted to also touch on the first commenter's points. I think she said that most of this is well understood by policymakers, and I wanted to turn a question back to the group because I have sometimes seen some rhetoric coming from policymakers that suggest that they do not understand the scale of fertility decline that's required to achieve these dividends. So they may think that it's possible to have a demographic dividend with a youthful population because they think that having a large youthful population is in and of itself enough to achieve economic growth. I'm thinking of a specific example of the president of Chad, who made a comment at a major UN event about 18 months ago, saying that his country was on the verge of achieving the demographic dividend. Now, you all know that Chad has one of the highest fertility rates in the world, about 7 children per woman. So any of these dividends is quite far off for Chad. So I just wanted to hear more about whether you all think that one of the key points that we're making, which is these dividends don't become available until your fertility rate gets below 3 children per woman, is that well understood by policymakers?
Is that something?
No.
No.
Well,
The other day I was talking about my president encouraging more women to
Yeah.
give back. Tanzania has been doing the same. So
Right.
it feels like, well, I was at a meeting where he said it while he was in Uganda. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that was.
So Dicta was making the point the other day that, some leaders, including Museveni and Magufuli in Tanzania, have made comments to the effect of, Africa's population is too low and we're counting on Ugandan women or Tanzanian women to fix that. But then they're also simultaneously making comments about wanting development to happen. So it seems like the answer is no, by assumption, because they're making those comments side by side.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you can't achieve both of those things. Statistically, what we're trying to show is it's almost impossible to achieve the high levels of development that we're measuring here and also have a very youthful and rapidly growing population.
Does anybody feel differently? Do you feel like that is something people understand and it isn't really necessary to explain it?
It needs more explanation.
It needs more explanation.
I'm thinking Kagame will be.
Yeah, so Kagame might be the exception, although Peace made the point that means he'll be in power forever. But yes, I think the consensus is that people don't understand that well enough and they don't make those connections. And Chioma from Nigeria has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a concern concerning Nigeria falls among countries with high fertility. But the issue of 1%, chances to achieving 25 deaths per 1,000 lives, it's something I think you need to explain more on.
Sure.
You get me?
We can go back and look at that one.
Yeah, please, can you throw more light on that?
Yes. Go back up to the health dividend. So we had chosen Ghana for that one, and I'm going to switch it to Nigeria. So we can see that all of the projections, each of these white dots is a 5-year population projection for Nigeria. They're all clustered at the very bottom of the graph. And the furthest one is the data for 2015, which I'm trying to highlight here. Well, here's data for 2020. So it says that if Nigeria has a fertility rate of about 5 children per woman in 2020, which I think is about on par with the current fertility rate. Is that right?
Yes.
She says yes.
And it has a median age of 18. That means half of the population is younger than 18. Then statistically, it only has a 2% chance of reaching that SDG's child survival target. I will say that SDG's child survival target is very ambitious. 25 deaths per 1,000 births is a very, very low number. And so it's going to be hard for most countries to achieve that. Perhaps they were a little bit too ambitious in setting that particular target. But we chose it because it is the one that's been adopted by the international community through the SDGs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if fertility starts to decline in Nigeria, the UN at least is projecting that fertility would reach 3.5 children per woman by 2050, and that median age would rise to 22. So that is some improvement, but still a really low likelihood of attaining that SDGs target. Now, I'll reemphasize that probability is based on the experience of over 100 other countries that have already passed through the demographic transition. So it's not based on anything specific to Nigeria other than its population projections. So there could be factors in Nigeria that either make it likely to achieve this dividend sooner or later than these probabilities suggest. And that would be where you'd want to look at the health system, at funding levels, at political commitment. So by no means is this probability here, this very low 8% probability, set in stone. It's not a guarantee, but it is saying that your odds are pretty low if you have a high fertility rate and a young median age.
So it's essentially saying, based on current trends, if nothing changes in current trend, demographic trends in Nigeria, then this will be the outcome. But that doesn't mean that things can't change. It's just assuming that they won't.
Sort of. So the first thing I would say is that this isn't exactly a reflection of current trends, because it is projecting that fertility will decline from 5 children per woman in Nigeria today to 3.5 children by 2050. And I'm sure our Nigerian colleague in the room can tell us that fertility in Nigeria has been very stagnant for decades. So in and of itself, this projection of a decline in fertility is hopeful. This is what the UN calls its medium fertility variant, which they think is the most likely, but it's not guaranteed. So that's one thing. And then the second is that, this probability it's simply based on the experience of other countries. So Nigeria could do better than this, or it could do worse. And that will be dependent on factors specific to Nigeria. The choices and investments that the government makes largely.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Comments, contributions? I don't think so for the moment. Liz, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Yeah, so Winnie from Malawi is asking if you can share all of this.
Yep, so if you see a link right at the top of the screen, right here.
Exactly. Is there anything else other than the presentation that you wanted to get?
Just to create a conversation where, because that is important, we want to make
Yep. Yeah.
So, okay, then we will assist you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is some additional text that we didn't go through as I walked you through this feature. So when you enter the link on your own computer, you can take a little bit more time to explore it. And there's some information, as you saw down at the bottom, about the methodology and the sources as well.
Okay. So we'll share this and the text that she sends and her contact details if you have questions you want to follow up about.
Well, by text, I meant the text is actually already in the web feature.
In the presentation,
Yeah.
I see.
I like this stuff here. I just skipped past this, but it's a little bit more background.
Okay. All right.
When is it coming out? When it's on the website.
It's on the website currently, but it's a new feature.
This link is active, so anybody can go to that link. And then when you do go to the graphs, we also have this feature here. It says step-by-step guide to interpret the data. And so you can turn that on. And there will be some instructions that pop up that give you a little bit more information about how to navigate the graphs. I just did it on my own, but you can turn this little button on and it'll help walk you through it.
Okay. That's great. Yeah, sure. Just one more question. Hold on a second.
Sure. We unfortunately have to wrap up soon. I think there's another meeting, but I'm happy to take a quick question.
So do we, but I think it's quick. Just go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. I just wanted to find out if there's any connection between empowering women and harnessing the demographic dividend. Yeah.
Let me turn that question back to you. Do you think family planning qualifies as a way of empowering women?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, yes, I think there is.
Yeah.
Do you-
I think the way that median age increases is through a decline in fertility. And some of the primary drivers of fertility declines are increased use of family planning and increased educational attainment by women. So absolutely, 100%, women's empowerment is key to promoting progress through the demographic transition.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. I really appreciate your feedback, and I hope that Alana will share my email address so that you can reach out if you have any more questions or even just any suggestions or thoughts. This is brand new, and we really value your perspective.
We will be sure to do that. Thank you so much, Liz.
All right, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.